Orlando, Florida, March 18, 2025, 7:42 a.m. Dr. Daniel Carter barely noticed the warm rays of the Florida sun streaming through his kitchen window as he sipped his lukewarm coffee. His mind was already at the hospital. Orlando General, the city's busiest trauma center, had been overwhelmed lately, an uptick in violent assaults, bizarre seizures, and unexplained deaths. Something was wrong, but the CDC hadn't issued any alerts. His phone buzzed. Dr. Jensen, ER chief, we need all hands on deck. Patients are going feral. Some staff injured. Where the hell are you? Daniel frowned, his gut tightening with unease. He turned on the news. Emergency rooms across Orlando are seeing a surge in unexplained violent incidents. Police report multiple attacks, some fatal. Residents are advised to stay indoors until further notice. He barely heard the rest. His wife, Emily, was at home with their 6-year-old son, Leo, but his daughter, Sophia, was on a school field trip at the Kennedy Space Center, over an hour away. Two choices: drive to the hospital and help the wounded. Rush to get Sophia before the city goes into full lockdown. Duty won over fear. He had no idea this would be the worst mistake of his life. Chaos. The moment Daniel entered the ER, he felt it. The waiting area was filled with people moaning in pain, bite wounds festering black at the edges. Security guards were barely containing a man flailing wildly, his bloodshot eyes locked onto a nurse's throat. Dr. Carter, a nurse, Mia Sanchez, grabbed his arm, pulling him toward Trauma Room 3. Inside, Dr. Jensen lay on the floor, his throat ripped open, his white coat soaked in crimson. What the hell happened? Daniel gasped. He coded, then came back, Mia stammered. He attacked Anna. Bam, bam. Gunshots echoed from the hallway. Daniel rushed outside. A police officer stood over the body of a patient, gun still smoking. The man on the ground should have been dead already, but he was still moving. The hell is going on? Daniel whispered. The officer met his gaze. Fear, confusion, panic. They don't stay down, Doc. The infection spread like wildfire. Security abandoned their posts. Patients turned on staff. The hospital, once a beacon of life, became a tomb. Daniel tried to save people. He stitched wounds, gave sedatives, locked down rooms. None of it mattered. They came back. They always came back. Then came the hardest choice of his life. A mother in the pediatric wing, bitten. Her son, barely 5, clung to her. Doctor, please, she sobbed. I don't feel right. But my son, please don't leave him. Daniel's hands shook. He checked her pulse, elevated. Fever climbing. Eyes yellowing. She wouldn't last an hour. A distant scream echoed through the hospital. The security feed flickered on a monitor. The infected were breaching the ICU. He had minutes. Save the child or stay with the mother. Tears burned his eyes. He grabbed the boy. The mother screamed, not from infection, but from heartbreak. He carried the child away as the doors burst open behind them. 11:45 a.m. Daniel drove through the collapsing city, white-knuckled on the wheel. Orlando was in chaos. Fires, overturned cars, people running, police shooting at civilians who wouldn't stay dead. He had to reach Emily and Leo. He had to get to Sophia. Then the radio crackled. Martial law is now in effect. Evacuate major population centers immediately. Do not engage the infected. The CDC urges extreme caution. Repeat, do not engage. There is no cure. Daniel's breath caught. The world had already ended. It just hadn't accepted it yet. Daniel gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The city around him was unrecognizable. Orlando was dying. Fires raged in the distance. Smoke curled into the sky, darkening the sun. People ran in every direction, some screaming, others eerily silent, their eyes vacant, their skin pale. Some were not human anymore. A man dashed into the street ahead of Daniel's car. He swerved, barely missing him. But then the man turned. Half his face was missing. Bone glistened beneath shredded flesh. His mouth twisted into a snarl, and he lunged, arms stretched wide. Thump! Daniel hit him. Hard. The body crumpled, rolling over the hood before disappearing beneath the wheels. His stomach twisted, but he couldn't stop. Not now. He stole a glance at the boy in the passenger seat. The child he saved from the hospital. Tears streaked his small face, his breath coming in hiccups. Where's my mommy? He whispered. Daniel swallowed. How do you tell a child the truth? That his mother was gone. That she had turned. That she was probably hunting him right now. Just stay with me, okay? We'll find help. The lie burned his throat. Military roadblock. The highway ahead was blocked. Military vehicles were stretched across the road. Humvees, transport trucks, even an armored personnel carrier. Soldiers in tactical gear aimed rifles at the crowd pressing against the barricade. Please remain calm, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. The city is under lockdown. Return to your homes or evacuate west on Interstate 4. People weren't listening. A woman clutched at a soldier's arm, screaming, "My baby is sick. Please, he needs a doctor." A man shoved forward. "They're killing people in there. Let us through." "Step back," one of the soldiers barked. I said, "Step back." A gunshot cracked through the air. The crowd froze. Daniel's heart pounded. This wasn't a rescue. It was containment. "Sir." A soldier approached his car, rifle slung over his chest. His eyes were hollow, exhausted. "You can't go in. You need to turn around." "My wife and son are in there," Daniel said, voice shaking. "I have to get to them." The soldier's gaze flicked to the child in the seat beside him, then back to Daniel. Something flickered in his expression. Regret. "You don't understand," the soldier said quietly. "Orlando is lost." Daniel's breath hitched. The soldier stepped back, raising his weapon slightly, as if he expected Daniel to fight. For a moment, Daniel considered gunning the engine, slamming through the blockade. What would they do? Shoot him? Maybe. Maybe not. Then he saw it, beyond the barricade, in the distance. A swarm. Hundreds of figures shambling toward them. Daniel had treated burns, bullet wounds, broken bones. He had seen death before, but not like this. Not when death kept walking. The soldier's grip tightened on his rifle. "If you love your family, get them and get out. Get them and get out." The words drilled into Daniel's skull as he floored the gas, veering onto a side street. He wasn't leaving without them. The house was still standing. Daniel killed the engine and scanned the street. Silent. Too silent. Most of his neighbors were gone. Or dead. He reached for his pistol. He had bought it years ago, barely used it. Now it felt like the only thing standing between him and oblivion. "Stay in the car," he told the boy. Daniel crept up the driveway. His heart hammered so hard it hurt. He reached the door. It was locked. Good. He rapped twice. "Emily." "It's me." No answer. He knocked harder. "Emily, open up." Footsteps. Fast, frantic. The door burst open, and then she was there. Emily threw herself into his arms, sobbing. "Oh my God, you're alive." Leo clung to her leg, his tiny face pressed against her jeans. Relief flooded through Daniel so fast he almost collapsed. But there was no time. "I don't know how long we have," he gasped. "We have to go." Emily's face fell. "Sophia." A cold spike of dread drove through his chest. "We're getting her," he said. "Now." Emily hesitated, her grip on Leo tightening. "It's over an hour away. What if we don't?" "We will." His voice was steel. He wasn't leaving his daughter to die. Then a sound from inside the house. A thud. Then another. Daniel froze. Emily's face drained of color. Leo whimpered, pointing toward the hallway. "Mommy, where's Mr. Thompson?" The words sent ice down Daniel's spine. Mr. Thompson. Their neighbor. The old man who had come over for coffee every morning. Was he still inside? A shadow shifted at the end of the hall. And then, the growl. Daniel shoved his family behind him. The shape lurched forward, a wet gurgle rattling its throat. Mr. Thompson was gone. What stood in his place was something else entirely. The thing that used to be Mr. Thompson lurched forward, its bare feet dragging against the tile. The familiar old man, the neighbor who used to bring fresh oranges from his backyard, was gone. What stood in his place wasn't human anymore. His shirt was soaked in blackened blood, his jaw hanging slack, broken. The skin around his eyes was turning gray, peeling away like old leather. His mouth opened, releasing a wet, gurgling snarl. Emily gasped, backing into the kitchen with Leo clutched to her chest. The fear in her eyes cut Daniel deeper than the monster before him. Daniel raised his gun. "Mr. Thompson," his voice was barely a whisper. "One last chance. One last hope." The thing snapped its head toward him at the sound, like a predator locking onto prey. Then, it charged. Bang. The first shot hit its shoulder, spinning it slightly, but it didn't stop. Bang. Another to the chest. No effect. It didn't feel pain. It didn't bleed like a man. It didn't stop. Daniel backpedaled fast, gun shaking in his grip. The thing lunged, arms outstretched, teeth bared, reaching for his throat. Bang! Bang! The first bullet cracked through its cheekbone, spraying bone and blood across the wall. The second, dead center in its forehead. The thing collapsed instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the body. His heart was a drum in his chest, hammering so hard it hurt. A second ago, this had been a man. A person. His neighbor. Now it was just meat. Leo sobbed into Emily's shirt, burying his face. She clutched him tighter, pressing a hand over his ear. Daniel slowly lowered the gun, his hands still trembling. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God, Danny." Daniel exhaled shakily. We have to move." He turned, rushing to the front door. The boy, the one he'd saved from the hospital, was still in the car. He had to get to him. The street was eerily empty. Daniel's boots crunched on the pavement as he approached the car, gun still warm in his grip. The kid sat exactly where he left him, his wide eyes reflecting pure terror. Daniel opened the door. The boy flinched. Hey, it's okay," Daniel said, softening his voice. "I'm not gonna hurt you, buddy. You're safe." The kid looked at him, then at the bloodstains on his shirt. "Safe?" Daniel sighed, wiping his hand down his face. He crouched slightly. "What's your name?" Silence. Then, barely a whisper, "Ryan." "Okay, Ryan. Listen to me. My name is Daniel. That's my wife, Emily. That's my son, Leo." He pointed toward the house. "We're gonna take care of you. But we have to leave." Ryan swallowed hard, his little hands clutching the seatbelt strap. Daniel gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Can you be brave for me, Ryan?" The boy nodded. Daniel forced a small smile. "Good. Stay here for just a minute. Keep the doors locked. I'll be right back." Ryan hesitated, but nodded again. Daniel shut the door, double-checking the lock before sprinting back inside. Mr. Thompson hadn't moved. Daniel stood over the body, his gun still trained on its head. He swallowed hard. The first rule of horror movies? Never assume they're dead. Slowly, cautiously, he prodded the body with his foot. No response. Just in case, he aimed again and fired one last shot. Bang! The skull split open, a final, wet burst of tissue splattering against the floor. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Now it was dead. For sure. Emily flinched at the sound, hugging Leo tighter. Daniel turned to her. "We don't have time to break down right now. We need to go." Emily nodded. She didn't argue. "We grab what we can, the most important stuff. 10 minutes. Then we're out." They worked fast. Daniel raided the kitchen, grabbing every canned good, protein bar, and bottle of water they had. Emily packed a bag for Leo, clothes, blankets, his favorite stuffed dinosaur. They filled 2 backpacks and 1 large duffel, stuffing in. Heavy checkmark first aid kit. Heavy checkmark flashlights and batteries. Heavy checkmark a small camping stove. Heavy checkmark extra clothes. Heavy checkmark a hatchet from the garage. Daniel took one last item, his father's old hunting knife. He slipped it into his belt. Emily held Leo close. "Where are we going?" Daniel zipped the duffel shut and slung it over his shoulder. "To get Sophia." Emily hesitated. "And if she's already?" Daniel cut her off, his voice steel. "Don't. She's alive." A distant scream echoed outside. Time was up. Daniel ushered them toward the car. They loaded the bags. Emily and Leo climbed into the back seat. Ryan watched silently, his small fingers gripping the seatbelt. Daniel started the engine. He took one last look at their home. Their safe place. Their normal life. Gone. He put the car in gear and pressed the gas. As they pulled away, the first infected stepped onto the street. They were everywhere. Too many. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. There was no turning back now. They had to move. They had to survive. They had to find Sophia. And if anyone got in their way, God help them. The road ahead was a war zone. Abandoned cars littered the highway. Some crashed. Others burned out, their steel frames twisted by fire. The skyline of Orlando smoldered behind them, thick plumes of smoke rising from the heart of the city. Daniel gripped the wheel tightly, weaving between wreckage and debris. Every turn could be a trap. In the back seat, Emily clutched Leo protectively, her arms wrapped around his small body. Ryan sat beside them, silent as ever, his wide eyes flicking toward every movement outside. Then, a ring-own shattered the silence. Emily gasped, fumbling in her pocket. Her phone screen lit up, displaying a name that sent a jolt of adrenaline through Daniel's chest. Mr. Gallagher, Sophia's teacher. "Hello." Emily's voice trembled as she pressed the phone to her ear. Static crackled on the line. Then, a voice. Mrs. Carter? Thank God. You're alive. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned down the car radio to hear better. Emily's fingers dug into the armrest. Where's my daughter? Is she safe? Gallagher's breath was shaky but steady. She's here. She's okay. A wave of relief crashed through Daniel so violently that he almost lost control of the wheel. Emily choked back a sob, clutching Leo closer. Where are you? We made it to Patrick Air Force Base, Gallagher said quickly. As soon as everything went to hell at the Space Center, the staff evacuated us here. The military is locking it down, creating a perimeter. They're checking everyone for infection. Daniel felt a sharp stab of hope, then doubt. A military base. Fortified. Secure. But would they let them in? Emily sniffled, her voice desperate. Can we come? Can we get to her? Gallagher hesitated. The base is on high alert. Right now, they're only taking in who they can confirm is uninfected. And his voice dropped lower. They've blocked all the bridges. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Blocked. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. Of course, they had. It made sense, cut off the mainland, contain the spread. But it meant they had no way across. I don't know if they're letting people in, Gallagher admitted. They're barely answering civilian requests. If I hear anything new, I'll call. Emily nodded furiously, as if he could see her. Please. Please keep Sophia safe. She's right here, he assured her. She's scared, but she's strong. Daniel exhaled sharply, blinking rapidly to stay focused. Sophia was safe. For now. Emily's voice cracked. Tell her we're coming. A pause. Then, softly, I will. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the road ahead, mind racing. Sophia was out there. She was safe, but separated. Emily wiped her face, sucking in a deep breath. We have to find a way to her. Daniel nodded. We will. But deep down, he knew getting there would be hell. Daniel's foot pressed harder on the gas, weaving through wreckage and bodies littering the road. They had to think. They had to plan. Sophia was so close, and completely out of reach. The bridges were blocked. Military lockdown meant no one in, no one out. But there had to be another way. Emily sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly at the phone in her hands, waiting for another call that might never come. Tears lined her eyes, but she held them back. Leo and Ryan sat in the back seat, silent. Too young to understand, too terrified to ask questions. Daniel exhaled, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The bridges are sealed. What else do we have? Emily sniffled, forcing herself to think. There are boat docks. Maybe someone's trying to cross that way? Daniel considered it. Risky. Unpredictable. But possible. Or, Emily hesitated. The causeways. They're not all military controlled. We could go south, toward Melbourne. There's a smaller bridge near Palm Bay. Daniel's mind raced. The longer they spent on the road, the more dangerous it became. They needed a plan. A solid one. Then, a car appeared ahead of them. But not on the road. It was off the side, stuck in a ditch. And next to it, a family. Daniel slowed the car, scanning the scene. A man and a woman struggled to push their SUV out of a deep ditch, wheels spinning uselessly in the soft mud. Two kids, a boy, maybe 10, and a younger girl, stood nearby, their faces pale with fear. Something inside Daniel twisted. Every instinct screamed, keep moving. They didn't have time. Every second wasted here was another second Sophia was alone. But then he saw the woman glance toward the tree lean. And his stomach dropped. Two figures emerged from the woods. Fast, jerky movements. Eyes milky white. Mouths hanging open, hungry and hollow. Zombies. And they were closing in. Mom. Leo whispered from the back seat. Emily turned and gasped. Danny. I see them. Daniel slammed the brakes and threw the car into park. The man at the ditch turned toward them, eyes wide with pure desperation. Please, he shouted. My wife, my kids. Daniel jumped out, gun already in his hands. The two infected snarled, breaking into a sprint, full speed toward the family. Daniel raised his gun, heart hammering. Bang. The first shot tore through the forehead of the first zombie. It collapsed instantly. The second one barely flinched. Bang. Bang. The second shot missed, grazing its cheek. The third shot took out its knee, sending it crashing into the mud. Daniel rushed forward, pulling his hunting knife from his belt. The thing thrashed, hissing, clawing at the dirt. But Daniel didn't hesitate. He drove the knife straight into its skull. Wet. Crunching. Then stillness. The thing went limp. Silence. The woman screamed, clutching her children. The man staggered backward, eyes wild. Daniel wiped the knife on his sleeve. We have to move. The family wasn't thinking straight. The woman, Rachel, held onto her daughter so tightly the child could barely breathe. The man, Ben, was shaking, hands still locked on the steering wheel of their useless car. Daniel grabbed his arm. We don't have time. Get your stuff. Get in our car. Ben blinked, confused. Wait, what? Daniel glanced at the tree line. More shadows moving. We don't have time for this. Either come or stay. Decide now. Rachel was already moving. She grabbed 2 backpacks, pulling her kids toward Daniel's car. Ben stood frozen, staring at the corpse at Daniel's feet. Then he snapped out of it. He grabbed his wife's arm, pulled her closer. We're coming. Daniel nodded. Then move. We are moving towards a country house. The house was empty. Daniel checked every room, raising his gun, searching the corners. Nothing. The windows were intact. The doors were locked. They were safe for now. Emily, Rachel, and the kids were huddled in the living room. Ben stood by the window, looking out. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. They needed a plan. They needed rest. They needed to keep moving. And they needed to find a way to get across the water before it was too late. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel stood by the window, his gaze locked on the empty road outside. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the overgrown grass and cracked pavement. They had a brief moment of safety, but it wouldn't last. They needed to keep moving. Emily sat on the couch, holding Leo close. Ryan curled up nearby, silent as ever. Rachel and Ben were still in shock. Their kids barely spoke a word. Daniel turned to Ben, his voice low and firm. We need another car. Ben blinked. Why? We have yours. Daniel exhaled, forcing patience. One car is too risky. If we break down, if we get stuck, if anything happens, we're stranded. Emily nodded. He's right. And we need space. There's 6 of us now. 7, counting Ryan. Rachel glanced at her husband. He's got a point, Ben. Ben hesitated, but then nodded. All right. Where do we find one? They scouted the surrounding area, staying close to the house. The street was lined with abandoned cars, some crashed, others simply left behind. The problem? Most of them were either wrecked or had no keys. Daniel clenched his jaw. Hot wiring wasn't an option. He wasn't a mechanic or a car thief. Rachel pointed toward a black Ford Explorer parked in a driveway. What about that one? Daniel walked over, peering inside. Keys. Right in the ignition. His heart leaped. But just as he reached for the handle, a low growl came from inside the house. Something was in there. Watching. Waiting. Daniel froze, motioning for the others to step back. The house was dark, the curtains drawn. But through the half-open front door, he could see movement inside. Emily whispered from behind. Do we risk it? Daniel glanced at the keys still dangling in the ignition. He had a choice. Go inside, kill whatever was in there, and take the car. Try another vehicle and waste more time. Time was the enemy. Daniel motioned for Emily to cover him. He was going in. Daniel pushed the door open, gun raised. Inside, the house smelled like rotting meat. A figure hunched in the hallway, its back turned, twitching, sniffing, searching. Then it jerked its head toward him. Its eyes were sunken, cloudy, inhuman. Its mouth was smeared with blood. Daniel fired. Bang. The bullet ripped through its skull, and it collapsed instantly. For a terrifying second, Daniel waited, listening. No other sounds. No other movement. He hurried back outside. The house is clear, he panted. Let's go. Daniel slid into the driver's seat of the Ford Explorer, turning the key. The engine rumbled to life. Emily and Leo climbed into Daniel's car, while Ben, Rachel, and their kids took the second one. 2 cars. More security. More options. Now, they needed a route. Daniel spread a crumpled map over the hood of his car. The military is locking down all major highways, he said. We have to find a back way in. Emily traced her finger along the map. If we head south first, we might be able to cut through smaller roads toward Palm Bay. Rachel bit her lip. What about boats? We could try the docks. Ben shook his head. Docks will be crowded. Desperate people. We don't want to end up in a mob. Daniel sighed. The bridges are blocked, but that doesn't mean there aren't ways around. One way or another, they were getting to Sofia. And if they had to fight their way through, so be it. 2 cars. 1 destination. Patrick Air Force Base. The convoy moved cautiously through the back roads of central Florida, avoiding major highways where the military had locked down access. Daniel led in the Ford Explorer, gripping the wheel tightly. Emily, Leo, and Ryan were with him. Behind them, Ben and Rachel followed in their own vehicle with their 2 kids. The plan was simple. Avoid highways. Head south toward Palm Bay. Find a way across the water to the base. But nothing about this journey was going to be simple. The landscape had shifted. Urban sprawl had faded into long stretches of empty farmland and wetlands. The further south they went, the fewer buildings they saw. Less civilization meant fewer people. Fewer people meant fewer infected. But it also meant less help if something went wrong. Ben's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie Daniel had scavenged earlier. How much farther until Palm Bay? Daniel glanced at the map on the dashboard. About an hour if we keep moving. If nothing stops us. Emily turned, glancing at Leo and Ryan in the back seat. The kids were exhausted, but no one dared to close their eyes. Rachel's voice came over the radio next. Do we have enough gas? Daniel frowned. They'd been driving on and off for hours. His tank was just above a quarter full. Ben's? No idea. Another problem for later. For now, they just had to keep moving. Daniel slowed the car. Something was wrong. Ahead, a massive semi-truck had jackknifed it across the road, completely blocking the only passable route forward. Shit, Daniel muttered. Ben's SUV pulled up beside them. He rolled the window down. What now? Daniel scanned the area. The fields on either side were too overgrown and swampy for the cars to pass through. That meant one of 2 choices. Find another route. Move the truck. Emily's voice was tight. It's getting dark, Danny. And they all knew what that meant. At night, the infected were harder to see. Harder to fight. Daniel exhaled sharply. They had to move the truck. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow as the semi-truck rumbled to life. The group had expected a long, grueling effort to move it, but by sheer luck, the keys were still in the ignition. With a deep groan of metal and gears, Ben threw the truck into reverse, clearing just enough space for their convoy to squeeze past. That was way too easy, Rachel muttered. Daniel didn't disagree. It felt like a setup, but there was no time to dwell. They had to keep moving. After several miles of open road, Daniel's eyes locked onto movement ahead. A military Humvee. 3 soldiers stood outside it, firing at a horde of infected shambling toward them. Gunfire cracked through the air, but the soldiers were outnumbered. They wouldn't last much longer. Daniel didn't hesitate. He slammed his horn, flashing the headlights. The infected jerked toward the noise. The soldiers whipped their heads around. In an instant, they saw their chance and sprinted toward the vehicles. Get in. Now, Daniel shouted. The soldiers didn't argue. They threw themselves into the trunks of the SUVs, gripping their rifles as Ben and Rachel sped past the horde. No one spoke for a moment, just breathing, shaking hands, racing hearts. Then, the lead soldier turned to Daniel. You just saved our asses. The group pulled into a small, run-down gas station. It was a gamble, but they needed fuel. The 3 soldiers jumped out first, moving with practiced efficiency. Sergeant Owen Briggs, the leader, was young but sharp, his uniform still covered in dust and dried blood. His team, PFC Tyler Mason and Private Alex Reeds, were barely older than kids, their faces lined with exhaustion. Briggs wasted no time. We need to check everyone for bites. No arguments. One by one, everyone showed their arms, legs, and necks. The soldiers did the same. Everyone was clear. Briggs exhaled, nodding. We owe you guys. Seriously. Daniel shrugged. Just glad you're not shooting at us. Briggs smirked. We thought about it. As they refueled the vehicles with what little gas remained, Briggs called into his radio. Command, this is Bravo 2, requesting survivor evac. We've got civilians plus children. Repeat, requesting immediate extraction. Static. Then, copy Bravo 2. What's your location? Briggs checked his map. Nearest evac point is the Hunters Club west of Palm Bay. Are we green to head there? Silence. Then, a voice from command. Roger that. Get them there ASAP. A Black Hawk will be waiting. ETA 90 minutes. The line went dead. Briggs turned to Daniel. You guys just got a golden ticket. But we need to go. Now. With full tanks and a new mission, the convoy sped south toward the evac point. The sky was getting darker. The roads were getting deadlier. But for the first time in hours, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. A helicopter. A real chance at escape. They just had to survive the trip. The convoy sped south, headlights slicing through the growing darkness. Every mile brought them closer to the evacuation point. Closer to the Black Hawk. closer to Sophia. But the roads were becoming treacherous. Abandoned vehicles lined the streets, some smeared with blood, others riddled with bullet holes. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel. He didn't trust the quiet. Then, Rachel's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie. "Oh God. Danny, look ahead." Daniel's stomach dropped. Up ahead, spilling onto the road like a living flood, was a massive horde of infected. Hundreds, blocking the only path forward. The headlights caught their faces, a writhing mass of dead flesh, gray skin stretched over decayed bones. Their eyes were empty. Their mouths hung open, hungry, endless. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. "There's no way around them." Ben's voice cut through the radio. "We can't stop. If we get stuck, we're dead." Briggs, the soldier in Daniel's passenger seat, gritted his teeth. "Then we pushed through." Daniel didn't hesitate. He floored the gas. The SUV slammed into the horde, sending bodies flying, crushing bone beneath heavy tires. Blood splattered the windshield as the wipers struggled to clear the mess. But the infected kept coming. They slammed against the sides, clawing at the windows, trying to drag the car to a stop. The vehicle slowed. Daniel gritted his teeth, pressing harder on the gas, but they were getting bogged down. Then, wham! Ben's SUV smashed into the back of Daniel's vehicle, forcing them forward. Daniel's head snapped forward, but it worked. They were moving again. Wham! Another hit. More bodies crunched under the wheels. They plowed forward, carving a bloody path through the horde. 20 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet. Then, suddenly, they were through. The Hunters Club loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette a beacon of uncertainty. The group pulled off the road, cutting their headlights. Daniel rolled down his window, scanning the area. The club was quiet. Too quiet. No signs of movement. No gunfire. No welcoming party. Just emptiness. Briggs turned to him. "I don't like this." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Neither do I." They needed to be careful. The convoy crept forward, stopping just outside the club. Everyone out. Daniel, Briggs, and Ben secured the vehicles, hiding them among the trees. Then they formed a tight defensive circle, guns raised toward the darkness. Emily held Leo close, her breath shallow. Rachel and the kids stayed low, silent. Briggs clicked his radio. "Command, this is Bravo 2. We've reached the evac point. Do you copy?" Static. Then, a voice. "Copy, Bravo 2. Stand by. Blackhawk inbound. ETA, 15 minutes. Daniel's heart pounded. 15 minutes. They just had to survive for 15 more minutes. But something didn't feel right. And as Daniel scanned the empty building, he couldn't shake the feeling. They weren't alone. The air was thick with tension. Daniel gripped his rifle, his eyes scanning the tree line. The club sat in eerie silence, its wooden structure looming like a ghost in the dark. No movement. No signs of life. But something felt off. His gut twisted. Then, Briggs cursed under his breath. The horde. Daniel's breath caught. The zombies they had pushed through on the road? They weren't just aimless wanderers. They were coming here. Ben stood frozen, his eyes wide. How long until they get here? Briggs pulled out his binoculars, peering into the distance. 10 seconds later, he lowered them. His face had gone pale. Not long. Silhouettes shifted in the distance. First dozens. Then hundreds. Shambling. Twitching. Moving closer. Daniel felt his heart hammering. The next 5 minutes would be the longest of their lives. Briggs slammed his radio on his vest. "Command, this is Bravo 2. The horde is closing in. ETA less than 5 minutes. We need that bird now." Static. Then in a response. "Copy, Bravo 2. Stand by." Daniel's fingers tightened around the trigger of his rifle. "Stand by," he muttered. "Are they serious?" Briggs didn't answer. Because at that moment, the first zombie stepped into the moonlight. Then another. Then the entire horde. "Open fire." Briggs roared. Gunfire erupted. Daniel fired shot after shot, his mind going blank as the infected collapsed under the hail of bullets. The soldiers held their ground, mowing down anything that came too close. But it wasn't enough. They just kept coming. For every one they killed, 3 more took its place. Briggs shouted over the gunfire, "We can't hold this position." Rachel screamed, holding on to her children. Emily pulled Leo close, her body shielding him from the carnage. Ben emptied his last magazine and cursed. "Daniel, what do we do?" Then, above the chaos, a new sound. A deep, thunderous roar from the sky. Daniel looked up and saw salvation. 2 AH, One Cobra attack helicopters thundered overhead, their rotors chopping through the night air. Then, the rockets came. Whoosh! Explosions ripped through the field, turning zombies into burning husks. The air filled with fire, smoke, and screams of the undead. Daniel shielded his face from the heat. The horde erupted into chaos. Then, the Black Hawk arrived. The Black Hawk's side doors flew open as it descended toward them. Briggs threw a smoke grenade, and the helicopter's crew chief waved them forward. Go, go, go. Daniel grabbed Leo and Ryan, lifting them into the chopper first. Emily scrambled in behind them, tears streaking her face. Ben and Rachel rushed in with their kits. Briggs and his soldiers covered the rear, firing until the last second before leaping inside. The Black Hawk lifted off, just as the remaining infected swarmed the clearing. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. They had made it. But at what cost? The moment they landed, soldiers swarmed them. Security check. Hands where we can see them. They were rushed off the helicopter, lined up, and checked for bites. Daniel's head swam. It was over. They had escaped. But where was Sophia? Hey, Briggs suddenly called out. Where's the girl, Carter's daughter? A nearby officer turned toward them. And then, a small voice called out from the crowd. Daddy. Daniel's breath hitched. Then he saw her. Sophia. She was safe. Alive. Daniel dropped to his knees as she ran into his arms. Emily sobbed, clutching them both. Leo wrapped his arms around his sister, holding on for dear life. Daniel's hand shook as he stroked Sophia's hair. I told you, he whispered. I told you we'd come for you. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he let himself believe they had a future.